Let's move to our trending topic. We're going to talk about Watchmen, the HBO series. Watchmen's an American superhero drama. It serves as a continuation of the 1987 DC Comics limited series of the same name, which was created by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. The HBO drama is set in an alternative reality where Robert Redford is president, Vietnam is the 51st state, white supremacists called the Seventh Kavalry have appropriated Rorschach's writings, one of the characters from the original graphic novel, and his masked image to wage a violent war against minorities and the police that enforce special reparations for victims of racial injustice. So inspired by the show, today we want to cover the topics of things like reverse racism, reparations, the psychology of Watchmen in general. It's a lot to talk about, so I wanted to move toward it quickly. But before that, I just want to ask general take on the show. All of us have watched some or all of it, and I'll start with Emma Kate. What's your take on this show?
I was actually talking to Jonathan Hedderly because I truthfully didn't want to watch the show because I feel like everything is scary and negative. And I liked it. I really did. I didn't want to like it, but I liked it. So I'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
All right, Frank, your take.
I really enjoy it. I love the original Watchmen. The Watchmen graphic novel is my all-time favorite graphic novel. And it still has this cool feel, but they've changed it up in a way that sort of this alternate experience and timeline it's crazy. And I will tell you, the ending of the first episode blew my mind. Did not see that coming.
Bless you, Emma Kate.
Didn't see that coming either.
We made it through 200 episodes before someone sneezed on camera.
Sorry.
Jonathan, your take.
I love this show. You and I actually watched the first episode together when I was visiting Nashville, and we just jaw dropped. Like, man, that was ambitious. They're not holding back that first episode, and they've continued to build on it. I love how each episode brings some level of clarity, but it throws in more questions and things that are confusing. It's scary how this is an alternative reality, but it maybe isn't so much an alternative reality than we would like to think, because it really is bringing something that up until recently a lot of Americans, and maybe myself included, thought we had made more advancements and maybe we weren't talking so overtly about, which is race relations, that in the last couple of years we've had to reconcile that we are not as progressive and advanced as maybe a lot of Americans thought we were. And we're really having to step back and reevaluate not only where we are, but how we are addressing race relations and racial tension in America. So I think this show is very profound in what it's doing. I think it could easily have derailed each and every episode, and somehow they're continuing to stick the landing.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a long time since I've loved a show like I love this one. I will tell you, it reminds me of the first season of Walking Dead, not the show itself in terms of the content but just how I felt about the show. Like I was so lit up by the first season of Walking Dead. Now I abandoned ship a couple years ago with Walking Dead, but in its early years, it was so just captivating and felt original, even though it was an old trope of a zombie show. This one feels like you can't compare it to anything. And I'm like you. It feels like it teeters on the brink of going off the rails all the time and never does. And I will say the other thing that's just amazing to me is there are some episodes, including the most recent one I saw, which is the one with the elephant that was hooked up. I left that episode. I watched it with my daughter and another person, and I said, I think I understood 3% of that episode. Like, I don't know. I have no idea what's happening, and I still love it. Like, that's the themes that go through that are very clear, but some of the specifics of like, what is this about and what's this about? And unlike something like Lost, which, by the way, the showrunner of this show, Damon Lindelof, was showrunner of Lost. where Lost felt like they were kind of making it up as they went, even though they said they weren't, and in fact they were. This one feels like they know what they're doing. Like it feels like it's confusing and unclear, but that there's a master plan. Would you agree with that?
So far,
Yeah.
I mean, but I felt that way with Westworld season 1 and season 2 really said, okay, well, maybe they weren't as clear or clean with what they were hoping to do. But so far, this show feels very singular in its direction and its goal.
Well, and I think one of the things that's always interesting too, when you get film or TV adaptation of comic books, there is some substance already there to work with. So, hopefully it doesn't go off the rails.
Yeah. So let's get into some of the deeper parts of it. And I want to ask about characters. If there's any characters for you that stand out in the show that have some psychological depth to them that you just want to highlight. Anybody, and you don't have to go around the horn on this one, just anyone who has a character that really interests you psychologically.
Well, I can't remember the character's name, but the police officer played by Tim Blake Nelson, the silver mask guy, I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But the episode where he's at the center and it really deals with his trauma.
Starts with the funhouse scene, and then that's the
And-
same day that the big squid.
Giant squid.
Yeah, right.
And 3 million people died right when he was having a sexually humiliating experience as a teenager. I looked at Frank. I don't know why. That's just
Random.
something psychoanalytic.
Who knows?
Something psychoanalytic happened in my brain there. Little Freudian glance. And then you find that he goes to these recovery meetings for survivors or people traumatized by the event, and that you find out that the inside of his hat is lined with is it aluminum? Is it
Yeah.
basically because he's afraid that shockwaves or other things are going to permeate his brain and cause trauma flashbacks and nightmares or pulses. It's just so interesting to see. And then when he finds out that how he viewed what happened that day was a conspiracy, and that it's not, I mean, it to me, it was just remarkable how this guy has tried to survive and deal with that. And even though he's a secondary character, like I want to learn more about him.
I can't remember the guy's name, but it's the dude that basically owned the idea the idea of being lynched. Remember that guy? He walks around with the rope around his neck.
Hooded Justice.
Oh, Hooded Justice?
Yeah, Hooded Justice. That whole transformation and that just blew me away. And then you're gonna walk around with a noose around your neck, fighting for justice is just God.
That we talked right before the episode. Sean Beck and I, our producer, I would say one of the best hours of television I've seen ever.
Me too.
Just the whole,
And that you take that KKK white robe, and we're going to make it a black robe, and we're going to have that white. I mean, golly, who thinks of that stuff? It's
Well, and
amazing.
It kind of has the most recent Batman Begins movie where Bruce Wayne talks up when Alfred asks him, like, why bats? He says, I'm afraid of bats. But it's time that my enemies share my fear. So it's taking something that you're fearful of, that has very negative connotations, and you use it as a power towards other people.
and it harkens back to the original movie when Rorschach, who uses the Rorschach as a mask, and he's had the mask taken off of him, and he's sitting down with the therapist or the psychologist, and he's giving him Rorschach cards, and he says, I see pretty flowers. I see happy children playing. And I'm like, holy crap, man. And he takes this mental ill antisocial thing and the way that you would test somebody to see how essentially crazy they are, and owns it and says, God, yeah, I get I get not emotional. I get really excited about these characters. Oh, and I have a question. I want to do this on the air because I haven't seen this last episode. Does Dr. Manhattan take over Vietnam, please? Did it happen?
Take over Vietnam?
Nod once for, like, did Dr. Manhattan do his thing to defeat Vietnam?
Yes.
You'll just have to watch, Frank.
Thank you, Dave.
There.
I'm so excited.
Well, how do you think?
Dr. Manhattan is one of my all-time favorite superheroes.
It's because of the blue penis.
Well, yeah. I mean, why not?
So,
And the hydrogen atom.
so it's full of very psychologically rich characters. We've already hit on this, but one of the main themes of the show has to do with race relations, racism, and I'm curious, whoever wants to take this question, what's your take on the message of that for the show? Like, what's the show communicating about race, racial relations, racism, and so on?
I mean, I think it's just stating an obvious thing that we would like to ignore is that, as in our culture here in America, we like to think that we are past racial discrimination. We've dealt with that. It's not part of our current narrative when the reality is it's still there. I found myself feeling particularly uncomfortable given my husband is a police officer, and some of the idea that people would target cops, and he is actually one of the good guys, and it only takes one or two bad apples to create a bunch of issues, and it's a tough thing. And seeing this show portray cops having to hide their faces, and I mean it's kind of a scary potential reality that could happen, and it bothered me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think right out of the gate, the central theme is on full display. It starts out with the Tulsa race riot of 1921, I think it was. And I mean,
Which,
I'll just be honest.
Just to interject, was a historically real event.
A real historical event. And I'll be honest, I knew nothing about it prior to hearing that it was a part of this show's narrative. And to me, that just speaks to how in our culture, things that happened, racial violence, racial discrimination, murder, getting away with it in our lifetime, that this has happened, like the civil rights movements and the civil rights in the 50s and 60s in the Deep South. I mean, people are still alive where that happened, and how quickly our cultural conscious wants to move beyond that, and the recognition that for some people that is deeply embedded in their beliefs and in their fears and in their worries about things that can happen to them at any given moment that many Americans just gloss over and say, like, but we've come so far. That's not us anymore. And when you see in that first episode what happened in those riots, and the fact that not every living American knows about that, to me, that's a travesty. That's us sweeping our history under the rug to make ourselves feel better and to pat ourselves on the back.
Yep.
And I think that's what this show is about. It's about the cyclical nature of our destructive racism, and how when we have a little bit of progress, we want to pat ourselves on the back and feel safer and feel better about ourselves, not recognizing that racism is systemic in our culture. It was founded in some ways. People may not like to hear this, but based upon us taking occupied land away from other people. I mean, that's just kind of our history and the roots of America that I don't think we've ever fully reconciled or even acknowledged.
Yep.
And you said this already, Jonathan, but we like to pat ourselves on the back for progress, but also I think the show depicts this as well, that when there is progress, there's a pulling back, there's an equal or maybe even greater force that wants to pull back that progress, that wants to sort of unwind that. And
which is exactly what we saw with Obama.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly the same thing. There's this progress, and now everybody's trying to pull it back.
Right. Sort of undo it or pull back into this thing. So, yeah, it's the central theme. Frank, any other thoughts about the themes of racial relationships, and so on in this show?
No, other than it's one of the things I enjoy about the film is it really takes me outside of my comfort zone, and it's just super disturbing. And I don't see any of this kind of stuff in my white centric world here in South Park, and I like how it makes me uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not even sure how to ask this question well, but one of the big themes related to this is the idea of reparations, and that's a big piece of the show, of a reaction to reparations. And do any of you have any thoughts about how, not just in the show, but how it's a topic that comes up culturally, and I'm not sure we know how to think about that. I'm not sure we know what's even the smart course of action with that. If it's even wise to think about it as a healthy thing or unwise. There's a lot of disagreement, and I don't know myself. I really don't. I don't know even how to think about it well. Does anybody have any, at least beginning thoughts about that?
I have no earthly idea how to think about it, because then I go, okay, yes, this country was built on the backs of slaves. I mean, just period. And I believe even the White House was built by slaves.
Well, even before that, I mean, the Native Americans occupied.
That's what I was going to say. All right, so we're going to do reparations for African Americans in the U.S. What about Native Americans? And we've been sticking them on reserves and what are they called? Reservations, not reserves. That's weird. Sticking them on reservations, and
wow, you
now
just showed your old white man. They're right.
They have casinos, and they have horrible education and poverty. Like, I don't know how to think about it.
It is a complex issue. I try to think about it in something that's a more everyday occurrence, which is when you see an individual in need or homeless on the intersection asking for money. And oftentimes I hear the debate, and even internal debate within me, do you give them money or do you provide opportunity and means so that they can have a better life? And this is very much overly simplified, but I don't think it can be an either or. It has to be both. And I've learned this when I've gone on cross-cultural missions trips. And how do you best serve and make a difference? You can't help build an infrastructure that's going to take decades to solidify and see progress while they're starving today. But you can't simply fill their stomach today without giving them hope and opportunities and a path for a greater tomorrow and future. And so when it comes to reparations, again, overly simplified, I'm not an expert in this, is that I don't want people to discount it, because it's like, well, then we're going to have reparations for everybody. And it's like, okay, well, if that would get us to stop being racist and discriminate people, is because there has to be a monetary consequence. I'm all for that, but I also don't believe that fighting racism or reconciling our past is that simple. And no matter what we choose to do, there's always going to be opposition, because there are just people that have an inherently racist and hateful heart that look down on others as lesser and cannot tolerate the idea that either they've done anything wrong themselves or that others are deserving of something.
And on the flip side, we also have people, and it's innate in us, that we can be compassionate. And so we can approach those that are suffering. And I think you brought up a piece that I would add to this, is making contact with people that are from different backgrounds, belief systems, countries. I mean, that's the way to at least start. And it's not about you trying to, push your own opinions, thoughts. It's simply just being curious and open to what does their world look like, and how, because the way we interact with the world is really shaped on how we view ourselves in it. And that's just the nature of how we perceive things. And so it's like, if we don't attempt to create experiences for ourselves where we can have opportunities to connect with somebody that's different from us, then it's going to be hard to make any change.
Well, and I would add to that in that Hedderly is somebody I exposed myself to, and I'm now interested in.
Now you're a registered sex offender.
I was just like,
Well,
exposed.
no, now I'm interested in Korean barbecue, and so I want to thank you for that new experience. Thank you.
No.
Nice.
Well,
So
Did you actually have something to add?
No.
Oh, jeez.
You really are
Okay.
sick.
Well, whatever.
last call. Any other thoughts about any of the themes or psychological ideas that come out of Watchmen that you just want to highlight before we wrap this up?
To me, it's a perfect storm that they use the Tulsa race riots because it also is taking place in Middle America. And to me, that's something that is, I think, just from a geographical standpoint, America is quite divided. And, the one thing that I want to caution against is by trying to bring nuance and attention to one demographic that we caricature another. Because I can't help but just even some of the people I personally know in Middle America, they oftentimes feel marginalized. They don't feel as important. They sometimes feel like political pawns when it comes to early elections. And so, the fact that they're using this as a place to talk about racial tension and just division in America, I think is really smart.
Agreed.
Good thoughts. Well, we have more to talk about. I'd love to revisit two topics that we've hit on today. One is I just would like to come back to talk about Watchmen at some other point. And the season's not done, so we might have another opportunity this season or the next season. And also, I think it'd be good for us just to immerse ourselves in just learning more about the whole idea of reparations so that we can think about that well, talk about it. That'd be worth revisiting as well. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Shrink Tank Podcast. For Emma Kate Wright, Frank Gaskell, and Jonathan Hedderly in Charlotte, I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. Tell all your friends about us and make it a great week.